Excuse me. Let's try that one more time. Hey, Dog Nation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. It expects to be quite a show today. Reaction to Jamie Newman's decision to opt out of the season and what's left for Georgia in the quarterback room, where the Dogs go from here. Why in the world would Newman make a decision like this so late in the process? We'll cover some of that with a very good guest today. Former Georgia quarterback Buck Bellew going to be with us. A little bit different time for Buck on the guest front today. Normally we do the guest around the 15-minute mark or so of the show. We'll catch up with Buck today around 10:40 a.m., so set your clock for that. Be with us for the full show. We'll do some comments in between the opening and then the guest. We'll talk to Buck around 10:40 this morning, and then, of course, have a regular R.S. Andrews cool down when the show's over with today. I think that Georgia can still be in plenty good hands with the quarterbacks who are left. Presumably now JT Daniels moves to the top of the list as the Georgia starter. I don't think this is a great look for Georgia, all things considered, at least in terms of every single fact and facet of this story. So there's a lot of opinions to be shared. I'll give mine. I want to hear from you, too. Comment section should be busy. Let's do it now. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I now have a pretty good clue when SEC fans have decided they think something bad has happened for Georgia. I've noticed this a little bit a couple times recently where, you know, I'm not always great about checking my Twitter mentions and kind of being on that side of Twitter, but sometimes I gravitate that way, and I'll notice that some old tweets of mine are getting retweeted, and it's usually like Vol Fan for Life or, Bull Gator or something like that who's tweeting this kind of stuff. And so yesterday, there was some of the Jamie Newman stuff that I've said in the past that was kind of getting some attention on Twitter from non-Georgia fans. They were laughing about that. Apparently, I'm now a source of opposing fan tears that these non-UGA fans seek out on a day when something seemingly bad has happened for Georgia. If you've been under a rock over the last 24 hours, I will let you know that quarterback Jamie Newman has made his decision to opt out for the upcoming season. But let me say this off the top of the program, and then we will cover a lot of ground before we're done, including welcoming in former Georgia quarterback Buck Bellew today as a very special guest to evaluate the current Bulldogs quarterback situation. I can say this confidently. There is not a single thing I have ever said about Jamie Newman that I would be embarrassed for someone to play back for me on audio or video right now. You want to go back in time to anything we've said on this show? I believe anything that I've tweeted. You want to go back over the very brief Jamie Newman era at Georgia, every single thing that we've said about Jamie Newman, I feel like I can stand behind. If it was replayed for me in front of you right now, I don't think I'd be ashamed of any of it. I never touted Jamie Newman as a potential Heisman Trophy winner, never said he was a lock to be a first-round pick. I simply said that he had the requisite skill set to probably be good for Georgia, and good may be good enough. The other thing that we have been saying over and over again, and this is really the place I want to make sure we begin today, that ultimately the job of resurrecting the Georgia offense, and this is an offense that was not good last year. It certainly wasn't good enough to win a national championship. It was the anchor that held the Georgia program back. But what we said throughout the entirety of this offseason was that the responsibility for transforming this offense did not rest with Jamie Newman, nor did it rest with any individual player. It's not the job of Jamie Newman, or it never was the job of Jamie Newman, to step onto this campus and be Georgia's offensive savior. That job has always rested with offensive coordinator Todd Monken. The job of making the Georgia offense what it needs to be is the responsibility of the coaches, not the responsibility of the players. Newman was good enough, I believe, to help get Georgia where it needed to go. But it was always going to be the offense that Todd Monken built around Jamie Newman that made that possible. Now that Newman's gone, you more fully turn your attention to JT Daniels. We'll have more on him coming up in a moment. Daniels, much the same way, is probably good enough to potentially get Georgia where it wants to go, but that's only if the offense built around who I now presume will be the starter, JT Daniels, functions the way that it's supposed to. LSU a year ago is the perfect example of this. And yes, I have said this over and over again until I'm blue in the face. But I have never seen a more stark example of this in my life in college football. Almost all the same players at LSU in 2018, with one set of coaches, Steve Ensminger, without any help as offensive coordinator. Same group comes back in 2019. Clyde Edwards-Helaire goes for 1,400 yards rushing. Joe Burrow becomes the number 1 overall pick. Jamar Chase becomes the Blitnikoff Award winner, all because they were playing in an offense that had been supplied to them by passing game coordinator Joe Brady, who's now the offensive coordinator of the Carolina Panthers. I'm not saying that I expect Todd Monken to have as big an impact at Georgia, but when it comes to making the impact, the responsibility exists for the offensive coordinator to make that happen. If you want to go back and look at the not so great moments for JT Daniels in a USC uniform, and there were some of those, I think a lot of that can be pointed to the fact that the offense that Daniels was given to run with the Trojans was probably pretty dysfunctional. Graham Harrell, who would come in 2019, JT Daniels never had a chance to work with him. That's what, Cleveland Slovis, that's what he got a chance to benefit from. Now the conventional wisdom is that Slovis was going to be the starter at USC, whether Daniels had stayed there or not. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but it's always seemed like somewhat of an unfair comparison for me because Slovis worked in an offense that just functioned better. And the same thing is kind of true for Georgia. The offense last season at Georgia was dysfunctional. It's why James Coley's coaching tight ends or whatever it is that he's coaching now. He was not, welcome as an offensive coordinator, I believe, here or really anywhere else at the high level of college football. He was given a chance last season, and he failed. Georgia had to rebuild the offense. Obviously, it needed more quarterbacks. That's why Newman was here. That's why JT Daniels was brought in there as well. But the responsibility for building the offense has always rested with Monken. We said that over and over again during the offseason, even when we presumed that Jamie Newman was going to be the starting quarterback. So that aspect of this story has not changed. The starting quarterback that I assume was going to be the case for Georgia, apparently that won't be the case. Newman's not going to play this year. But the job of making the Georgia offense what it needs to be, that was always Monken to begin with, and none of that is different. Now, let me kind of move on here and talk a little bit more about the guy who now takes even more center stage in the absence of all of this. That's JT Daniels. Exactly who is he and what is his situation right now for Georgia? As I said before, this is a guy coming off injury that kept him off the field for most of the 2019 season. Apparently that injury still lingers with him a bit. He did scrimmage on Saturday, but as Kirby Smart said, don't take that to mean that if there were a game today, he'd be capable of playing in it. This is Smart going back to last weekend. Let me let you hear this.
JT is not cleared still. I know y'all think he's cleared, or what you think of as cleared, but cleared to me is I can go out and play a full game of tackle football. So yeah, he gets to scrimmage, but he doesn't. He wouldn't be cleared for a game in terms of contact yet. So that factors in the decision. Then also the other guys, what they can do with their feet. Sometimes that's a tough measurement at quarterback unless you go live with those guys. So we haven't had anybody separate yet.
Obviously, the notion that no one had separated this quarterback battle is something that people are circling back on right now. I'll have more on those thoughts coming up a little bit later on in the show, but also the idea that Daniels, now presumably in place to be the starter, isn't even fully cleared to play. I honestly don't even know how much I'd even really make of that right now. I think a lot of this kind of stuff comes down to semantic differences sometimes. Words have a tendency to mean whatever coaches want them to mean in any given moment. Kirby says, y'all think he's cleared to play because there had been some reports that he was. But Smart says he's not cleared to be tackled in the game. The reason why I would downplay Smart's assertion there on that is he has apparently had enough room at practice, given the level of clearance he does have, to show off the athleticism that's in place for him. The reason why we know that is because of something that Todd Monken said about Daniels really not all that long ago. So maybe not cleared to be tackled to the ground yet in a full tackle football game, but still, I guess, if you want to say it this way, cleared enough that he's been able to show off some of his athleticism during Georgia practice. We know that's true because of what Monken has said. Here is Monken on that.
The one thing I would say about Jamie is that he is a better thrower. Everybody talked about his athleticism, but he's a better thrower than people think, and I think JT's a better athlete. So, obviously there's film on both of those guys. Obviously, JT is a young player at USC throwing the football, and there's film of Jamie obviously running Wake Forest's offense very efficiently. And like I said, I think from the first 5 days, I think JT's a better athlete than we would have thought, and Jamie's a much better thrower.
So listen, Smart says Daniel's not cleared for full contact yet, but he's at least cleared enough that he's been able to show off his athleticism to Todd Monken. Let me kind of wrap this portion of the conversation up by saying this. Yes, I had touted Jamie Newman to be the starting quarterback, and yes, I still believe if Newman would have stayed, he was going to be the starting quarterback, at least at the beginning of the season. I haven't heard anything that fully convinces me to change my mind of that. But I've always said that I thought that Daniels was a capable quarterback too, and I still think that as well. If Todd Monken builds an offense that works, I think Daniels is the kind of quarterback, if he truly is healthy, that can work in it pretty well. I don't think that Georgia's overall trajectory changes all that much, although some people think that it probably does. I think this is still a team that can get to where it wants to go, but the answer of how that happens has not changed at all through this entire process. It's simply about building an offense that's better than the abysmal performance of a year ago. That responsibility has always rested with Monken, and that doesn't change no matter who the starting quarterback is. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by our friends at Merriweather and Tharp, and great to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just great to have all of you with us today. I'll make a corny joke and say it's kind of nice to be having Merriweather and Tharp on the show today, in a day in which we're talking about a divorce now between Newman and UGA, but obviously Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. They are the ones that you can trust. When you have questions about the divorce process, they have answers for you. They've been through this thousands of times. That institutional expertise that you build and develop over the course of that time is really, really important. They can put that to work for you. The divorce process can be scary and confusing, especially if you haven't been through this before, and for many of you, this is the first time that you're going through this. So put your faith and trust in Merriweather and Tharp. They can be the advocate, strong advocate on your side, because they know what this process is like. They can guide you through it. They can make you whole again, rebuild your financial situation, your relationship with your children, all the things that are potentially scary, offshoots of a conversation like this. Merriweather and Tharp can take good care of you all the way around on all of that. They are good friends of ours, great supporters of us here at DawgNation, and a good friend to so many of the folks in our audience who find themselves in a tough spot. A good friend on your side makes a tough spot a little bit easier. So your source for Georgia divorce is Merriweather and Tharp. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. All right, as I mentioned before, we've got a good guest coming up on today's show. It's Buck Bellew, the former Georgia quarterback, longtime Atlanta radio host. In fact, he's celebrating 20 years on the air in Atlanta. We'll congratulate him for that, but he's going to tell us more about what he thinks about Jamie Newman leaving, JT Daniels now maybe stepping up. What about DeJuan Mathis? What about Carson Beck? We'll cover all of that ground here on our program here today. Before that, though, let's talk a little bit more about what it is that kind of has led Jamie Newman to make this decision. And I'll mention him in his own words here for a moment. When he put out his own statement on Twitter yesterday, one of the things that he cited was the uncertainty that's kind of related to a global pandemic. And obviously, you do want to take that part of this seriously. We have said the entire time that when it comes to players and their decision to play or not, that we were going to respect anyone's decision who decided playing football was not for them. Admittedly, the timing of this is a little bit weird. We can show the Newman statement on the screen if you want to. Admittedly, the timing of this is a little bit weird, and it does cause me to raise an eyebrow. The fact that he had seemingly been all in on this throughout the entire process, and only now has he decided that that he doesn't want to play football. If it truly is related to the pandemic, as he mentions, then more power to him. If it's because he thinks his draft slot is already solidified, I think he may be sadly mistaken when he gets to this upcoming spring on that. That's just the honest truth as far as I'm concerned. I also think it's probably not true that Newman had found out that he was not going to be the starter at Georgia. I think there's a convenient logic that kind of pops up sometimes. It's sort of like the same thing when a recruit decides he'd rather be somewhere else than Georgia. There will always be people that pop up and say, well, that's okay. Georgia didn't want him anyway. They were just processing him out of the recruiting class. There will always be people to say that. When a guy like Newman decides to opt out, there will always be people who step up, try to fill the void of Georgia fans who may be worried and say, well, that's okay. He was going to be the starter anyway. I simply don't believe that to be the case. The other thing that's going to come up here is, well, maybe he was going to be the starter at the beginning of the year, but he was still worried about that competition. that exists between he and Daniels. And who knows? Maybe that is true. I can't put myself in the head of Newman or anybody else. But here's the one thing I will point out. And by the way, we'll show you what Kirby Smart said about this too. Kind of a classy line from Kirby Smart, basically wishing Jamie Newman well. We'll show that on the screen here. Basically wishing Jamie Newman well and, saying he fully supports the decision. Smart kind of takes the high road all the way around on all of this. But as far as the notion of a competition, and was Jamie Newman kind of scared off by the competition that was potentially in place? And that's enough of the Smart clip. Thank you. Was he scared off by the competition that was potentially in place there? Here's all I can say. When you look at the way that Georgia quarterback competitions have played out in recent years, in some cases, those competitions would give you just a little bit of reason to be nervous. I mean, think about how these things have played out recently. Go back to the 2016 season. At least for the very first snap of the very first game, this, vaunted Kirby Smart quarterback competition initially pegged Grayson Lambert over Jacob Eason as the starting quarterback, even though Eason was clearly the better of the two quarterbacks. Then in 2017, this same Kirby Smart quarterback competition that supposedly is so, valuable and important for this program tabbed Eason over Jake Fromm, even though the moment Jake Fromm stepped in after Eason's injury, he proved himself to be a much better quarterback as a freshman than Eason had been the previous season. It's almost like, at least when it comes to beginning of the season starters, the Georgia quarterback competition got it wrong 2 years in a row, which leads you to 2018, and obviously it's controversial, but can anyone say that Jake Fromm is a better player than Justin Fields? Yet in 2018, somehow this quarterback competition at Georgia tabbed Fromm over Fields as the starting quarterback. Once again, in hindsight, it sort of seems like that Georgia quarterback competition just kind of got this wrong. Listen, I'm a golf fan, and for golf fans who like talking about golf courses and things like that, U.S. Open courses, one of the things that gets said a lot is that you judge the quality of a course by the winner it produces. That certain courses are great because when you look at the list of winners when major events have been held there, you see a list of some of the top players in the sport. Well, if that's true for golf in the U.S. Open, then what would you say about the quality of the Georgia quarterback competition in recent years based on the winners that those competitions have produced? If Newman was nervous about the status of this competition, I think it's at least fair to wonder, is part of this based on what he has seen happen in the past with some of the competitions and how they've gone down and the winners those competitions produce? The other thing I'll say, just very quickly before we wrap this part of the conversation up, is that, the one thing that no one also seems to be acknowledging right now on the basis of this quarterback competition is the fact that sometimes pretending like there's no separation between quarterbacks or, saying that kind of thing over and over again is also, and it's not just at a place like Georgia, this is true all across college football. This is just the mechanism that coaches seem to use a lot, they have at their disposal, is to pretend there's no separation whatsoever between quarterbacks because you're trying to keep other quarterbacks from transferring out of the program, or in Newman's case, maybe keeping him from opting out of the program. And so the tight-lipped nature of the, intense, close competition, sometimes that is true for coaches. Sometimes it's also just a way to kind of keep people in the fold and keep them from looking elsewhere around the program. One way or another, Newman is gone. Georgia's still fairly well stocked at the quarterback position without him, and a lot of curiosity about what happens next. We'll talk more about this to Buck Bellew in just a moment. Before that, though, let me welcome in our friends at Classic City Lager to the DawgNation family and here on DawgNation Daily. Classic City Lager is just good cold beer. It's available in 6 and 12-pack cans. This is one of my favorite beers to enjoy, whether I'm getting together on game day or, hanging out, doing all kinds of fun stuff. It's just it's an Athens original. It's a great beer choice for you. It's a very easy drinking, crisp, kind of a lighter tasting beer. It's really good stuff. Classic City Lager is also the proud partner of DawgNation's home cating channel, which you're going to hear a lot more about over the course of the season. So when it's game day this year, whether you're watching games at home, getting together with friends, maybe lucky enough to be on your way to Athens and hanging out somewhere, tailgating before the game begins, the best way to enjoy the game day experience is with our friends at Classic City Lager. You can find out more about them by checking out this hashtag. It's hashtag good cold beer. You can check that out. And of course, Classic City Lager is available year-round throughout the state of Georgia. So pick up your 6 or 12-pack cans at your local retailer today. All right, busy edition of our program here today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. more on what is being said about Newman's departure later on in the program. For now, though, let's find out what a former Georgia quarterback thinks about the current Georgia quarterbacking situation. Let's get ready to talk to the national championship winning signal caller of the Dogs. Let's talk to Buck Bellew. And for those of you watching on video, my apologies for the bait and switch here. We'll get Buck coming up in about 10 minutes. I had told our video audience prior to this that we would do that with him. We're about 10 minutes away from talking to Buck Bellew. We have time for your comments before we get there. So you kind of hear my thoughts. I think this is still Todd Monken's job to build this offense, no matter who the quarterback is, whether it was Newman or Daniels. I don't have a lot of high tolerance for Newman slander. I really don't. This idea that he didn't want to compete and he wasn't any good. And, after an entire offseason of touting him as many people anyway, as a Heisman finalist, first-round pick, all of a sudden he was destined to ride the pine at Georgia. That seems like a very convenient narrative to emerge, right now. I have no idea if he was going to be a great quarterback, nor could I be sure that he wouldn't be overtaken eventually during the season by someone like a JT Daniels or a Dwan Mathis or really anybody else. But, the idea that now that he's gone, there's this imperative need to slander him, make him sound like he wasn't a good football player. That just seems too convenient in the moment. And so I'm not going to do a ton of that on the show here today. Although, admittedly, his own decision here, based on the way that I currently understand it, the timing of it all, is also a little frustrating for me. So more than one thing can be true at once. I'm a little frustrated with Newman and the fact that he's chosen to do this right now, if it is for reasons other than he just, is very worried about the coronavirus. But also, I'm not going to reinvent the predominant storylines just because Newman isn't here anymore. So that is that. Let's go to Facebook first. We'll get a few of your comments. And in about 8 or 9 minutes, we'll talk to former Georgia quarterback Buck Bellew here on the program here today. Caleb Squire says, I know that Dwan Mathis has been overcoming health issues, but any update on his size? So the one thing I would say about, Mathis is because he's taller, he's always going to appear to be a little, lighter built than other quarterbacks. I don't think he's as thick as Newman was. Admittedly, that was one of the things I always liked about Jamie Newman, was that he did have the muscle structure to absorb the wear and tear that's going to come from playing in the SEC. But I don't think that Dwan Mathis, at least on the basis of kind of what I've seen, you're watching on video now, you see stuff from last year. How much thicker is he now compared to when he was when that video was taken? I can't say that with full confidence because I'm not at practice, but I certainly haven't heard anyone say that Mathis is too slight of build to potentially be a quarterback at the SEC level. Brian Whitehead says, I find it hard to believe that Newman would come here, leave without playing a game, if there wasn't some sort of security in the pocket. Draft stock maybe didn't go up, but didn't drop either. I think the only problem with that, though, Brian, is if we were sure that Newman was going to be, a first or a second round pick, then why not just go to the draft last year? I mean, it's not like there were, a ton of middle round quarterbacks that would have, completely pushed Newman completely out of the conversation. It's not like that would have, that would have happened. If someone told Newman that his draft status was secure and he had nothing to worry about, I think that Newman's probably gotten some bad advice. Now, he could still. I mean, we've seen quarterbacks who've played badly before still get drafted high. Allen, the Buffalo Bills starting quarterback, is an example of that. He did not have a good college career, but was still a first-round pick. So, having a good final season in college isn't a prerequisite for being a high NFL draft pick. On the basis of personal or private workouts alone, maybe Jamie Newman dazzles. But if he's told that that's secure and that's already in the pocket, then I think he's probably gotten some bad advice on that. Bill Rogers on the subject of Carson Beck. Beck was one of those guys I think you would say stands to be a little bit of a winner in all of this because everybody kind of moves up one chair now that Jamie Newman is gone. And I think some people have said that I haven't given Beck enough of a chance in this quarterbacking race. I just think it's fair to point out, and all I can ever do is just be honest with you about my opinion, but Newman had started a bunch for Wake Forest. Daniels had started a bunch for USC. Dwan Mathis had been on campus, even if he wasn't fully healthy to practice for the entirety of last year. He was still observing those practices, and by the end of the year, he was practicing at Georgia. There's a huge difference in going from 0 to 1 in terms of years on campus and experience, and because of that, Mathis just did have the edge, I believe, over Beck. But now there's one fewer, quarterback to be considered, and obviously Stetson Bennett's a part of this too. But even still, Newman's absence means there's one fewer quarterback to consider. That can only stand to help back a little bit. Ben Green says, I'm definitely not thinking Jamie was bad or anything. I'm just thinking he could have been nervous enough to avoid the chance of losing the job. But who knows what was truly going on there. And I think that's probably true. A little nervous by the fact that he hadn't been named the starter yet. You almost wonder if the Newman camp and whoever his advisors were that helped him come to Georgia, you almost wonder how well did they advise him on the fact that for those of us who follow Georgia football closely, most of us are not surprised by the fact that Kirby's handling this quarterback situation this way because he pretty much always handles it this way. Prior to Daniels coming in, you can go back and hear me say this, and I kind of stand by this now, that I probably would have treated Newman as the starting quarterback. I would have given him all the first-team reps. I would have treated him as the starter. Once Daniels came in, I would soften my stance on that a bit because obviously Daniels himself was also an experienced player at the Division I level and a higher-rated recruit coming out of high school to the extent that matters. But, prior to Daniels arriving, I had said that I would have treated, Newman as the starter. And many of you rightly said, well, BA, that may be your opinion, but you know good and well Kirby Smart wasn't going to do that, and you were right about that. I hope that Newman entered into this situation knowing the same thing, that maybe Newman wasn't lighting the world on fire during practice. Some of the whispers I've heard from the scrimmage suggested he did just fine. Who knows how great he was going to be. Certainly didn't hear he fell flat on his face during the scrimmage last week, at least, the whispers that I'm, kind of hearing on that. But whether he was great or not, Kirby Smart would still likely be handling the quarterback situation exactly the way that he is right now, because this is the way that Smart does all of that. So I'm not going to read much into Smart's words in terms of what it means for Newman, because as I've said before, and some of you don't like when I say this, but you could have written the script for Kirby on this quarterback thing a year ago and just changed the names. Smart's just fairly predictable when it comes to this kind of stuff. And as I said, it's not like the Georgia quarterback situation over the last 3 or 4 years is exactly batting 1,000 when it comes to choosing the right quarterback anyway. Greg Childers says, what would a story would be if Mathis leads the team after going through what he went through last year? It's a story in the making. I am pretty confident in saying that Dwan Mathis is probably one of the 5 most popular players in this Georgia team right now, on the basis of just the comments we get. There's always a level of curiosity about certain players that's not always related to how often they're playing, how big a, what the regular, kind of reporters are writing about. There's a certain number of Georgia players who are just more popular, than sometimes the coverage they get. For the last year, Mathis has kind of been one of those guys. Georgia fans do love the feel-good nature of his story, and for the people who've gotten a chance to see a brief glimpse of him, whether it be at G-Day 2 springs ago, some of the stuff that has been made available from practice or whatever else, he's a good-looking football player. I mean, when you see Mathis, and last year I got to see some practice, when he goes under center, and, he's not, obviously, what I saw last year was not him, being tackled to the ground or anything along those lines, but when you see him doing some of those drills in practice, he looks great. Big, tall frame, big arm, kind of a nice, is it gait? Is that the word you use? The way that he kind of runs, he just sort of looks like an athlete. So it's not a surprise that a lot of people really like Mathis. That's not a surprise at all. Let's see what else. Prince Johnson says he thinks that more people are going to opt out. Maybe so. And if it's because of their concern over the virus, there's very little I can do, or would even be willing to do to say about that. If it's something for some other reason, then admittedly I'd be disappointed. I mean, I'm going to try to, make 2 different arguments here when it comes to Newman. I don't think this is necessarily proof that he was heading for, just a disappointing year at Georgia and he got out while the getting was good. But at the same time, I can't fully support the decision that he made. The whole hashtag respect my decision. I can't fully respect this decision. If it wasn't completely and totally virus related, just basing on the timing of when it happens. Over here on YouTube for a couple of minutes. Green Soldier says that Newman was thinking about going for a while now. Could very well be true. I mean, obviously this is not the kind of thing that would very quickly, such a drastic decision. It seems like you couldn't really make something like this truly very quickly. I think that's probably true. Brady Pest Management says it's simple. Kirby Smart didn't name a starter privately after Saturday's scrimmage. Newman did not like that, and he dipped. Maybe that's the case, but, I mean, is that really any different than we've seen Smart behave before? I don't quite think that. Christopher Wilson says, do you think we'll ever find out the real reason? Here's the problem with the so-called real reasons when it comes to stuff like this. Everybody who's got the sort of inside information on stuff like this, everybody's got a vested interest in their own side of the story. It's the same reason why, politicians are always leaking stuff to reporters. They want to look good in the news. So any kind of like real reason about anything that happens around Georgia football is always based on the behind the scenes source who's whispering the real reason. So that's the thing you've always got to be careful about is that everybody's story, everybody's the hero of their own story. No one's behind the scenes. Here's the real scoop. No one has ever shared a behind the scenes scoop that made themselves or, look bad. That's just not the way that life works there in that regard. So yeah, that's just kind of the problem with determining a real reason for anything. All right, a couple more, and we're going to talk to our buddy Buck Bellew here in just a moment. Chase White says, should we question Smart's quarterback eye? Here's the only thing I'll say about that, Chase. I think I'm going to write this coming up at DawgNation.com a little bit later on today. I think for Kirby Smart, someone who is obviously a very good coach looking back over the course of the last 4 years, I think that it is fair to say that for someone who's one of the great strengths that Smart has displayed as a coach is his ability to, manage situations, right? I mean, I say this as a compliment. He's kind of a control freak, right? He just controls everything. He manages things. He seems to have a plan for everything. And yet somehow that intense energy for management, that desire to control, somehow that has not prevented his quarterback situation from spiraling into chaos now multiple years. Jamie Newman leaving right before the start of the season. Jake Fromm leaving last year after his junior year, even though his draft status was far from secure, ended up being a 5th-round pick. Obviously, everything that happened with Justin Fields in 2018. This has just kind of been a weird run at the quarterback spot for Georgia. So you've got this coach in Smart who's a great manager, who's a obsessive, total chaos all the time. And maybe the presence of a JT Daniels settles all that down and, everything kind of falls into place. Maybe that's the case. But as it stands right now, this is more of the same for Georgia. Kind of a wild Mr. Toad's Wild Ride scenario at the quarterback spot, while everything else of the program is pretty locked down and pretty together. We'll take a few more comments here. Christopher Wilson says, anybody know Mathis' strong suit, more pocket, more dual threat? He is definitely among the more athletic quarterbacks that Georgia's had in quite some time. Johnny Underhill says JT Daniels for Heisman. Who knows? Maybe he does step in and have that kind of year for sure. Let me go back over to Facebook for a couple of minutes. Reggie Walker says the real question is JT Daniels an upgrade from Jake Fromm? Reggie, we may be about to find out. All right, so it looks like our buddy Buck Bellew is ready to go. We'll get more of your comments here coming up in just a little bit, more of what the media is kind of saying as well. But the Jamie Newman news, it is a wild day on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. No one knows the quarterback job at Georgia better than our friend Buck Bellew. Let's talk to him right now. And on a day in which Buck Bellew celebrates 20 years on the air as an Atlanta radio host, an amazing accomplishment. A lot of times the media world is certainly not a long-term proposition, but it has been for Buck because of the professionalism that he's shown for such a long time, and we're lucky enough to get to share in some of that here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. So let's welcome him in right now. Buck, first of all, congratulations on the 20 years, and thanks for spending some time on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. How you doing today?
Doing well, B.A. Always glad to be with you, and thanks for the shout-out there with the 20 years. Day one, when they hired us, I asked the boss, David Dickey, I said, what would be a good run? And he said, well, 5 years would be a good run. So just feeling really lucky today, very fortunate. It's been a dream job situation for me. I got this job and never pursued another one.
Well, that's certainly great to know, and I would imagine your job made easier on days like this when there's big news out there. We find out yesterday that quarterback Jamie Newman deciding to opt out for the season, mentioning the confusion around the global pandemic as part of that. Some people have speculated that there's more than just the virus on his mind. What do you make of the fact that Newman has decided he doesn't want to be at Georgia anymore?
Well, my first reaction was just picking up the phone, calling DJ Shockley to see if he had any eligibility left. But, I did have somebody on social media saying, Baloo, they might need you to take some snaps. And I was thinking, are you kidding me? It'd be tough to get out of the way these days. But, yeah, it was surprising. The thing that's most curious to me is that you would put in all this work, and then when the payoff was coming up, you elected to bow out. So, the time and energy and work and commitment that you have to put in to play at a high level, quarterback in the Power 5, and be successful is just the ultimate commitment you've got to make. And it just seems strange you would, bow out here 3 weeks before the start of the season. But, in these crazy times with this COVID-19, I'm trying to take people at their word, try not to be judgmental and things like that. To see the opt-outs going on all over college football right now, and if, look, the young man's not comfortable, then I can certainly understand that.
Well, I think it's good advice to take him at his word on that. I think that's certainly fair to say. There's also been some speculation out there of, well, maybe he was influenced by someone to do this. We don't know that. It's as I said before, it's total speculation to even bring that up. But, Buck, if we did find out that was true, that someone got into his ear and said, Jamie, you don't need to play college football this year. Who knows what's going to happen at Georgia? You need to come, let's say it was an NFL agent who says, you need to come sign with me and we'll get you ready for the NFL draft. If that were the case, if we ever found out that was true, I would certainly be fearful that Newman maybe gotten some bad advice from someone who benefits from Newman's decision without being sure that it actually benefits Newman.
Well, for me, it just seems, from the very beginning, he was totally focused on what he could do to make himself a better NFL prospect at the quarterback spot. I mean, even in the beginning, moving from Wake Forest to Georgia, part of the reasoning was to be able to become a better passer in the system Georgia was going to run. It seems like everything was about him getting to the NFL. And, maybe it's me just being old school, but it didn't seem to be very much about the team. And the team winning big, and that's what everybody's trying to be focused on right now. But, if I had to be critical from the outside looking in, that would be the criticism I would have.
How about JT Daniels? How good do you think, if we assume that he has even a better chance now to become the Georgia starter, how good do you think Daniels can be for UGA?
I actually believe just watching what he did as a freshman, starting that whole year at USC, watching him run that offense there, which seems to be pretty similar. Really proficient running the RPO system, which is, I think, we're going to see a lot of. A guy that is a really good passer, a better passer than Jamie Newman, I believe, overall. A lot of this air raid stuff is short to intermediate, high percentage stuff, and I think JT Daniels looks like a guy that was better doing that than, say, a Jamie Newman. And, I just think he's a better fit with what Monken wants to do. I look at where Monken's been and the things they've accomplished offensively. I don't recall there being more than one guy that was considered a dual-threat running quarterback like Newman. So I was wondering how that fit would shake out anyway. And looking at what Daniels does, I think he is a better fit for what Monken wants to do.
One of the things I talked about before you joined us was the role that Monken plays in all of this. Buck, I have been honest that I don't think the Georgia offense functioned very well last year, and I think some of that is laid at the feet of James Coley. I think that Monken's got a big job in trying to upgrade this offense. Now getting a chance to work with Daniels, how important do you think the job of Monken is this year to make Georgia more explosive? Or as you mentioned, maybe it's a little bit more the air raid stuff and it's a little more up-tempo, or just finding some way to make the passing game more potent. How important do you view the job of Monken to be this year in all of this?
Well, I would imagine that he and Kirby had a heart-to-heart prior to him taking the job about the control he's going to have doing what he feels like is best for the offense. And obviously Kirby, played along with that a little bit. And so thus Monken is doing what he's doing right now. And he, I'm hoping we're going to see him spread it out and go 10 personnel a little bit more and throw it. That's how you get the playmakers the ball in space, is spread the field with 3 and 4 wide receivers. The 10 personnel group, the 11 personnel group. Maybe you take a tight end with McKitty and the fabulous freshman Big Zero. You flex them out a little bit and they become an inside receiver. But I'm just really anxious to see. I don't think the run game's going totally away. And when you talk to these air raid gurus, they will tell you, well, look, the run game, man, that's the short passing game. That's what the run game is in this air raid. So I'm really curious to see how we're going to go about running it, what the plan is running Zamir White up in there. It seems to be sort of a hodgepodge thing across the country when you look at the air raid outside of that zone read that you see so much. So I'm anxious to see how it all comes together. We hadn't had a chance to get in and see it any, but
yeah,
as you watch the air raids around the country, it's more about throwing that ball short to intermediate, high percentage, and that becomes your running game for the most part. I don't buy for a second we're going to turn the back on the run.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Let me squeeze in a couple before we let you go. I've talked about Dwan Mathis. I think he's one of the more popular players in the Georgia roster because of what he's overcome to even be back on the football field again. Based on what you've seen from Mathis, whether it be in a G-Day or, maybe even what you've heard from others, how good do you potentially think a guy like Mathis could be if called on to play some significant snaps this season?
Well, I'm sure he's been really impressive in the 7-on-7s that they've done a lot of in recent months. I wonder, with the lack of experience, what it's going to look like when you go 11-on-11. I think he's a guy growing, developing, but, if you're looking for a guy to stand in that pocket and get that ball downfield, maybe flush and run a little bit, I think he's a prospect there. You got the kid from Jacksonville, Beck, who I'm really impressed with, student of the game. Physically, he has everything that you need to be successful. Seems really into it and dedicated. I think he's got a shot, but as a freshman, to try to master all you need to master to win big, and that's what Georgia's trying to do, is probably a stretch to think that, he can come in immediately and be the QB. Jake Fromm spoiled us a little bit with that.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Well, Buck, we appreciate your time on our show today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. When it comes to your own show, remind folks how they can catch you on the radio, celebrate 20 years with you, and enjoy 20 more of talking things like Georgia football on the airwaves in Atlanta.
Well, yeah, we've got the fan app. You can get, obviously, crystal clear anytime, anywhere. Then streaming online at 680thefan.com, AM 680. 93.7 on that FM dial. Thanks, B.A.
Yeah, Buck, appreciate your time. Good stuff there from Buck Bellew, the great former Georgia quarterback, national championship winning quarterback. And one of the things we're always really proud of is, these guys that, they go on to have media careers, things like that, but their affection for UGA doesn't change. David Pollock's one of those guys. A lot of folks are like that they just kind of move on, and they still love those dogs. They love talking about UGA. It's great that you get a chance to hear from Buck Bellew doing that on the show here today. A couple of things that he mentioned I think are important. First of all, I want to give credit to Buck, and I'm no X's and O's expert. In fact, sometimes I kind of roll my eyes at some of that kind of stuff. But I'm going to give credit to Buck for the correct usage of the RPO phrase. I think sometimes when people use the word quarterback and RPO together, they have a tendency to think the run-pass option is a quarterback run or throwing the ball. That's not what an RPO is. An RPO is a either handoff play or pull the ball back and throw that. That is something that JT Daniels did during his time at USC. So shout out to Buck Bellew for correct usage on the RPO phrase. I also think it's interesting to think about it, as Buck kind of talked about, with what the Todd Monken offense ultimately going to look like, something that we would presume that Daniels will be comfortable in. The difference between 10 personnel, which is one running back, no tight ends, or 11 personnel, which is a back and a tight end. I think the best of Georgia probably does include a tight end on the field. Now, as recruits have told Jeff Sintel, what they've been told by the Georgia coaches, that will be more of a flex end now moving forward, someone that's not hand on the ground, but someone that is playing almost out like a slot receiver a little bit more. But that beef of a tight end, that ability to still block and get downfield and open up some holes for running backs potentially, and also just be a physical presence that can kind of post up defensive backs or linebackers going across the middle, that's still a valuable thing for the Georgia offense overall. So I do think that's what Monken's probably going to bring to Georgia. And I do think that on the basis of what we kind of understand about JT Daniels, that he does have a chance to be a good fit for this. Doesn't mean that Jamie Newman couldn't have been a good fit. As I've said before, I can't be clear about this. I think that Newman was going to start at Georgia against Arkansas to begin this upcoming season. And whatever happens after that, it would be whatever happened after that. I think it's probably unfair to Newman to act like that, somehow he, had found out he definitely was not going to start this upcoming season. But one of the things that a lot of people had told us, stat guys have told us this, people who watched film and seen both these quarterbacks, that it's almost like Daniels and Newman were good at the opposite things. And it was always a weird comparison between these two anyway, because, Daniels was probably a little worse than we expect the typical USC quarterback to be. Newman was probably a lot better than we expect the typical Wake Forest quarterback to be. So how do you compare between those two? To make matters even more intriguing or confusing, whatever word you want to use, is that it seems like, and other folks have told us this, that Daniels probably was pretty good at short to intermediate throws, something that you assume the Todd Monken offense might have a lot of. Maybe not quite as accurate on some of the deep throws, the real explosive throws down the field where the ball's traveling 20 yards in the air. By comparison, as weirdly as it might be, Newman at Wake Forest was apparently really good at those deep throws. You've seen Pro Football Focus. And by the way, pour a little out for Pro Football Focus today, because no one has invested more into the Jamie Newman hype than Pro Football Focus, kind of viewing him as, I don't know, third best quarterback in college football, whatever it is they said that he was going to be. Those folks must be sad today about Newman's departure from college football after everything they've invested into talking him up this far this season. But they are the ones that kind of gave us the stats that Newman had been really accurate on those deep throws, those balls 20 or more yards down the field. He'd been really accurate on those throws, but a lot of folks connected to Wake Forest would say, but sometimes in some of the easier throws, the shorter or intermediate throws at Wake Forest, maybe that wasn't Newman's strong suit. Now, why is that? Who knows? Lesser competition, inferior game plan, although I do think Dave Clawson's a pretty good coach. Who knows what created that, or maybe just Newman's own lack of accuracy. You really can't know that to be true one way or another, but it is interesting just how different Daniels and Newman kind of were at their previous stops at the college level on that front. But finally, though, the point that Buck makes, I think, is a good one. In the midst of talking about who the Georgia quarterback is going to be and what's going to happen for Georgia in that regard, in the midst of discussing all of this, it is still true that Georgia is still going to have to lean on its running game. And I have always been of the belief that the running game for Georgia wouldn't suffer because of the presence of Todd Monken. This isn't an example of a guy that was going to be so pass happy that all of a sudden there's going to be no running game whatsoever. This is still a guy whose offenses have benefited running backs at Oklahoma State, as a head coach at Southern Miss. This is still a guy that has created a situation where running backs can thrive. I mean, Monken wasn't the play caller with the Browns a year ago, but he was a heavy influence on that offense, and certainly Nick Chubb did pretty well for the Cleveland Browns this past year. So Monken's still a guy where running backs can have their success and be a part of that. And maybe now, with a little less certainty of the quarterback position, maybe running backs will be even more important again, at least at the beginning of the year. But ultimately, the recipe for Georgia, the ability to win a national championship, the ability to do things better than it's done in the past, I think is going to be about just how emphatically the Dogs upgrade the offense and how much more explosive it can be than it was a season ago. Won't have Jamie Newman to help with that anymore. It'll, I guess, likely now be JT Daniels who steps into the role as Georgia's starting quarterback, and the job of building an offense around him, if it hasn't already started, it certainly begins right now.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So really good stuff from Buck Bellew. We're lucky to have Buck on the show. He's a good guy talking Georgia football. Happy to do that here on DawgNation Daily, presented by our friends at Merriweather and Tharp here today. We'll have more on the Jamie Newman situation here coming up in just a moment. Before that, let me make an announcement, something I'm really, really excited about. We're heading towards the start of the season, so a lot of our scenarios are kind of getting into play. Some of you have asked about this. I want to let you know that DawgNation is proud to partner with the UGA bookstore. Once again, we're going to be back at the UGA bookstore for the 5th consecutive year for our DawgNation postgame show. I can't wait for that. In fact, I've even got on a shirt today, if you're watching on video, that I got from the UGA bookstore. So we're really happy about this. It's kind of our home away from home during the season in Athens. We're always up there on the second floor at the UGA bookstore. Many of you kind of show up down there after the games are over. You're shopping for the apparel, much like I'm wearing right now. And there's listen, great selection of the UGA bookstore. You can find it all. I think I'm wearing Peter Millar today, 47 brand, Tommy Bahama, Vineyard Vines, Nike, Cutter and Buck, all those great brands that make the UGA stuff. UGA bookstores got it all, so they're always there for you. They're also open 24/7 online at UGAbookstore.com. So check them out in person at the UGA bookstore or online, UGAbookstore.com, and you can get geared up and ready to go for the upcoming season. We'll see you at the UGA bookstore after games later on this fall. All right, a little bit of a recruiting news to get to, and then we'll get back to the quarterback stuff involving Georgia. Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, good-looking defensive lineman for the 2021 class, has dropped his Final Four, and you see Georgia in there along with the Tennessee Vols, who've become a little bit of a factor in the 2021 class, North Carolina, who has been a factor for a lot of big names right now, Gamecocks kind of in there as well. You know, Georgia lost out on a defensive lineman last week when Tim Keenan chose Alabama. Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, or TID, as many folks kind of call him on the recruiting trail. He has been a guy that has kind of grown with some of his attention with UGA for a while. Seems like this relationship may be pretty good between Ingram Dawkins and Georgia. We'll find out more with that when Jeff Sintel joins us on Friday here on our program. But for now, TID has a Final Four, UGA included, along with the Tar Heels, Gamecocks, and the Tennessee Vols. That was really interesting yesterday to see Florida quarterbacks coach Brian Johnson talking about the work that Kyle Trask has done over the course of the offseason. You hear a lot of this time of year, but it's best shape of his life. You know, he's ready to go for the upcoming season. You know, he's just ready to, you know, to be out there and just going to have a great year. And maybe that's true. I think that if Florida fans are some of the ones stirring the pot right now on what happened with Jamie Newman leaving yesterday, and that makes them feel even better about their situation this upcoming season, I think they could potentially find out pretty quick that maybe the world isn't working out quite as well as they hoped it would. Maybe things aren't going to fall into place for them quite as easily as they think they probably should be. I mean, I thought that Jamie Newman had the potential of being a better quarterback than Kyle Trask. I'm not going to change my opinion now that it's Newman gone and probably JT Daniels in place. The quarterback situation at Georgia is far from secure. The offensive questions at Georgia, many of them remain unanswered. But in terms of the possibility, in terms of the potential, the starting quarterback at Georgia still being better than Trask at Florida, no matter how good a shape Johnson, the quarterback's coach, says that he might be, that is still quite possible all the way around here. I am not that worried about that at all. The bar set by Kyle Trask in a Gators uniform is not some insurmountable hurdle to be overcome. Far from that. So if Florida fans are having fun at Georgia fans' expense today, I would say there is still a great chance that UGA gets the last laugh on all of that. I have mentioned to you briefly before that one of the things that's been really confusing with me is trying to keep up with the schedule. Normally September is, you know, a month in which we're already knee-deep in football. Not quite the same way this year. We just had our first game of the season last week, and you know, now we're kind of moving into a little bit heavier schedule this week with more games to come, and finally the SEC getting rocking rolling later on this month. I will say tonight we have our first two FBS games of the season, and I guess the biggest of these games, at least in terms of the news that's been made this week, is the fact that Central Arkansas, that played Austin Peay last week, plays UAB tonight. And in testing this week, after having played the game against Austin Peay last week, Central Arkansas has had no positive tests here this week. So for those people who are always kind of looking for that good news, that evidence that maybe we're going to get back to football and everything be okay here, at least a brief glimmer of good news in the fact that Central Arkansas, after having played last week and now turning around and playing very quickly on a Thursday night here right now, that's a challenge in and of itself. Short week, testing, no one tests positive, and so now they will get going against the Blazers of UAB later on tonight. There are 4 games in total Another one of those games involves FBS foes. I think Houston plays. Is it Houston Rice? I think plays tonight. That's the other FBS level game. At least Houston Rice are. So 4 games in total tonight. A little bit bigger crop on Saturday. Navy BYU, I believe, is the marquee game this weekend, if you want to use that phrase around all of this. And we'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp, want to get ready for our Kroger Fresh Take. As you know, Kroger's fresh for everyone, and they present a fresh take to you each and every day or each and every week here on our program. And I want to circle back on just the notion of what this means for Georgia now that Jamie Newman's not here anymore. I saw some comments in our Facebook comment section a moment ago from people who are saying they're tired of the fact that all of this resurrects the Justin Fields narrative around Georgia. And unfortunately for the people who are tired of that, a situation like this proves it's just not going away. Fields was in the stands on Saturday for the scrimmage, and unfortunately his presence in the stands probably overshadowed the quarterbacks who were on the field. That's not necessarily a great thing for Georgia, but it's just kind of where things are right now. There was even all kinds of weird internet chatter last night on the basis of some of the stuff that you may have seen on Twitter. In fact, I'll show you one of these Twitter messages here. Dog Out West on Twitter pointing out the fact that Justin Skylar Fields' name was still listed in the student database at the University of Georgia. I guess it was never just scrubbed out of there. There are apparently a lot of former Georgia players whose names are still in the student database, despite the fact they're no longer students. But the Twitter chatter that erupts around something like that, the buzz created by Fields' presence when he's at the scrimmage on Saturday, just shows you that he still casts a shadow over Georgia that still exists right now. And you may not like it, but you can't pretend that it isn't true. And that probably does put more pressure on Georgia to make sure that it's got its ducks in the row with the quarterback it plays this upcoming season. In fact, there are people, even folks who love Georgia and are proud of Georgia as their alma mater, who are now kind of concerned about how good Georgia's going to be now that Jamie Newman's no longer here. I'll show you what David Pollack said about this on Twitter. Pollack yesterday saying that with Jamie Newman as Georgia's quarterback, and we'd certainly heard plenty from Pollack in terms of how much he liked Newman. He says, with Newman as the Georgia quarterback, I was going to pick them to win the Natty. Now, he says it's back to Bama and Clemson. Now, that doesn't mean that JT Daniels can't also be a very good quarterback for Georgia, but it gives you an idea, someone in Pollack who really thought Newman was going to be the guy for Georgia, to say nothing of former Georgia quarterback Aaron Murray, who was also on Twitter sharing a similar opinion, saying that Jamie Newman looks like he's going to opt out. That's sad. I was looking forward to seeing him run Todd Monken's offense. Would have been a perfect fit, Aaron Murray said. So that's kind of what's out there right now. Some folks just wishing that Justin Fields would come back to Georgia and save the day. Some folks feeling like Georgia now won't be as good with Jamie Newman not at quarterback, now maybe less of a national championship contender. And some folks like Aaron Murray saying, I just wanted to see how Newman would have done in an offense like this. As I said before, that is not evidence that Georgia is now doomed to fail this upcoming season. But it is evidence of something that should be obvious. There is now more pressure on Smart as the guy that oversees this program, Todd Monken, the guy tasked with resurrecting the offense, and the quarterbacks who remain with Jamie Newman gone, to just be better than this unit was a year before. When you were as good as Georgia was defensively last year, when you have the overall level of talent that Georgia has, it's almost impossible to be as mediocre offensively as Georgia was. It is the reason that Georgia was, not as much of a national championship contender as it possibly could have been. Even in a year in which LSU may have been historically good, Georgia was inexcusably bad too often on the offensive side of the ball. So with all of the attention that Newman got during the offseason, and now all the attention that his departure is also going to get, there probably is an extra layer of pressure that exists on UGA. But the good news is, whether it's the coaches who agree to coach here, the players who show up to play here, they know what the deal is before they get involved. They knew what they were signing up for when they signed up. The pressure to perform is never going to go away. It may just be slightly more intense this year, but I can't wait to see how the Georgia coaches and players step up to that challenge. That's our Kroger Fresh Take. It's brought to you by our friends at Kroger. And, of course, we're heading towards a long weekend, Labor Day weekend coming up. That means lots of grilling time, and Kroger's got you covered on all of that. You can do your Labor Day cookout for less, save on charcoal and chips and snacks and even baby back ribs. Of course, don't forget the dessert. Get everything you need for s'mores and everything else with our friends at your local Kroger as we head towards the Labor Day weekend coming up this weekend. I'll also give you a programming note. Normally, we don't take Labor Day off because it's typically the Monday after the first game for Georgia. This particular week, we are going to be gone on Monday, so apologies in advance for that. And then back on Tuesday in our normal time, getting ready for the upcoming season and talk more about Daniels and Mathis and Carson Beck and everything else. So we'll be off on Monday, still here tomorrow, and then rolling ahead towards the start of the season, beginning again on Tuesday. So quick update on all of that. Let me also give you Gator Hater Updater. As I said before, Florida fans may think Newman's departure is good news, reason to laugh at Georgia, reason to go back and find some of my old tweets and retweet them. But it's been a long time since Florida's had anything to laugh about when it comes to Georgia. 1,405 days. That's how long since those lousy, stinking Gators beat the Georgia Bulldogs. And JT Daniels may be the guy to add to that list and that long group of numbers coming up later on this fall. We'll see you tomorrow. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. We took some comments a little earlier. It is a little later now because of that. We've got some time for comments right now. We're going to have to rock and roll after that and get ready to go here today. So let us do that. Let me go to YouTube, get some comments here, and then we'll kind of dive in and get some more for some other folks. John Hendricks checking in. John, appreciate you being here. William Bird, not feeling good about the Georgia-Florida game. I don't like to hear that, William. We've got to get you convinced otherwise. Nathan Boris says, if I'm being honest, I would have liked to have seen JT Daniels as the starter regardless. So, yeah, I mean, there were people who felt that way. Green Soldier says, how athletic was JT prior to his injury? I think that, and I'm just going to speak, kind of off the cuff here for a moment, maybe fair to say that he was more athletic than Jake Fromm, but probably not in the category of what a Jamie Newman might be or a DeJuan Mathis might be. So do with that what you will. Maybe a little more mobile than Fromm, but not as mobile as a mobile quarterback. John Snook, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Lance Freeman says, does Mathis have a chance to start? I would say that he probably does. I would say that, much like I've said about Newman for a while now, Daniels' experience, assuming he is healthy, and I think it's safe to say that he probably will be once it really truly matters. But yeah, I think that obviously Mathis is a part of this competition for sure, but I would say that the Daniels experience gives him a big edge there. I just think experience matters right now. James Cameron says, rumors Kirby's opting out now. No, I don't think he's probably going anywhere. Jason Crosby says, if it all starts up front, if the quarterback doesn't have any pressure, he's going to look awesome. And yeah, that's one of the things that you got to think maybe attracts quarterbacks to a place like Georgia, at least you'd hope anyway, the chance to play in front of a better offensive line than they're used to playing in front of. Even though the Georgia receiving corps hasn't been great, a chance to play with better receivers than they're used to playing with. Rock T-Mac says, any chance that Fields talked him into leaving? I don't think so. I think there's this assumption that somehow, Fields hates Georgia, Georgia hates Fields, but the fact that they were together this past Saturday would seem to suggest that's not true. DB says Justin Fields is enrolled at classes at UGA as of 9/3/20. This is no joke. That's not quite what I think is probably going on there, but we shall see. Let me get a few Facebook comments. Robert Barnes says, I don't think we need to start calling Newman an ex-Georgia quarterback. Monken said Daniels is more mobile than they thought. Yeah, we played that audio for you a little earlier, and yeah, I don't think that Newman will be a part of the lineage of Georgia quarterbacks. I think you're right about that. Shelton Tucker says Carson's going to prove he's the best. Shelton Tucker's been on Carson Beck since the beginning, for sure of that. Matt Rukavina says, what's your take on what, if any, impact this has on Brock Vandegrift and how much he plays next year? Well, given the fact that, if Daniels plays this year, he will be 3 years out of high school. He can go on to the NFL draft. When Daniels first came in, admittedly, I thought he was probably more of a 2021 option because of the fact that he had been hurt and everything else. But I have a cramp. Let's see prevent this from happening. But I mean, if Daniels were to play well this year, he can move on to the NFL draft after this season. I don't think that does much to change Brock Vandagriff's mind one way or another. First of all, because these truly elite quarterbacks don't seem to care much about that kind of stuff. They'll kind of go where they want and not worry that much with the competition because they assume they're going to win. For the good or for the bad, that ends up being true, that they are not usually very shy about competition. The other thing is Vandagriff has said that geography is a huge part of his decision to come to Georgia. He just decided he wanted to play a little closer to home, and it seems like through this recruiting process, he's enjoyed being the Athens area UGA commit because he's seemingly hosted and, I don't know, housed for all I know, some of these commits when they've chosen to come by and take a visit to Georgia. So, from that standpoint, I would say it has very little impact on Vandagriff for those two reasons. Alan McGovern says it sounded to me that Ballou didn't care as much for Newman. I think it's probably a fair reading of that. I don't think that Buck would mind it being characterized that way. Maybe not fully saying he didn't care for him, but it certainly seems like that the way in which Jamie Newman was kind of brought in here is kind of a transactional mercenary, if you will, just someone to use for a year, and Newman was going to just use Georgia for a year to try to get better. Sounds like that didn't sit great with Buck. I think he'd probably be fine with that being said that way. David Hill says JT won't go to the NFL with Lawrence and Fields going. You may be right about that. I'm just saying that he would be eligible, and it'd at least be a consideration if he played well this year. Terrence Anderson says our quarterback play starts with a strong offensive line, got some youngins there, got to get stiff quick, and yeah, that's obviously a big part of that for sure. Charles Felder says, let's not forget that Stetson Bennett's been a faithful dog and also has waited patiently for his turn, and he does deserve some love for that. Bennett was the only of the quarterbacks on Saturday not to get any kind of time with the number one unit, but part of that's because Georgia has seen him in that spot before. But he has certainly been a good soldier for Georgia throughout this process. Adrian Hill says, why is it that everybody seemed to be okay with a mobile quarterback now, but when we have one that wasn't the case? I don't know that anyone's not okay with Georgia having a mobile quarterback. I think the athleticism is the kind of thing that some people were kind of excited about. Andrew Hughes predicting Mathis will start. Boy, that'd be an interesting story if that eventually happened. That would be quite a story if it happened. Hugh Nash says Mathis got a lot of talent, but more than that, he's a fighter. Don't undervalue what he's been through. I do like fighters, and he certainly is. Let's get a few more YouTube comments. I'm going to get ready to go after that. We'll have a Cover 4 live tonight, 6 p.m., presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. That should be quite a conversation. Mark Woodman C says Monken just needs to confuse defenses until we get secure at the quarterback position. And, yeah, listen, I mean, in terms of trying to use your word, get secure, the task of getting secure at that spot is made easier by the fact that a guy like Daniels is here. I don't love everything about the way that Smart's handled the quarterback position, but I do have to admit that on a day in which, Jamie Newman's kind of done a little bit of a weird thing, having Daniels all of a sudden feels like a nice comfort for Georgia fans for sure. Coach McCook says, why is everyone sleeping on JT? I don't know that anyone is. I think that most people would view JT as a guy that has a chance to be a very successful player here. I think he had a okay year at USC, so he's not a perfect prospect, but he certainly got his fans. Green Soldier says the doom and gloom over here reminds me of Larry Munson's pre-week prediction. It's all over in some of the minds of the YouTube comment section. I hope that's not the case. If I could establish some parameters for a conversation, here's what they would be. I think it's wrong to say it's doom and gloom and Georgia's now destined to fail this season. But I also think it's wrong to say this is all a part of Kirby Smart's master plan. He's been playing 4D chess, and everything that's occurred is exactly the way that he intended it to. I don't think that we who are Georgia fans benefit by treating Smart like an infallible genius, like there's nothing he's ever done that's been anything less than perfect. I don't think we benefit from that. I think, if anything, we benefit from pointing out what Georgia still needs to accomplish. And there is a lot left to be desired by how Georgia's handled its quarterbacks in recent years. That doesn't mean that Daniels can't be great, but if somehow this doesn't quite work out, it's just another in what is kind of a long list of just weird, seemingly needless drama for Georgia at the quarterback position. So that's kind of the boundaries I would set. This is not obvious proof that things are destined to be terrible, nor is it obvious proof that behind the scenes that Kirby Smart's had a master plan all along. I don't think it's either one of those two things. And I say this all the time. I find the need to repeat this again. When it comes to the other part of this of, oh, man, listen, Kirby Smart's always got a plan. This is exactly what he thought was going to happen the entire time. Always be very careful of this. Anyone who's telling you 100% of what you want to hear, there is 100% chance they're lying about something. You should always hold on to your wallet anytime someone has designed an opinion that is perfectly 100% pristine, exactly the way you wish the world was. Because none of us ever get 100% of what we want on any subject, anytime ever. There will always, though, be people who try to provide you that because it's just good business. But be very careful when someone is telling you 100% of what you want to hear. There's 100% chance that person is lying about something. They are either deceived or they are deceivers. So just keep that in mind. Jay Shipe said, did Newman use UGA to go from unknown quarterback to get NFL buzz going? I would say the answer to that is no because of this, Jay, and maybe you'll agree with me, that there's no doubt that Newman's name is higher on some mock drafts and more attention from like some of the websites than he may have otherwise gotten. But that media buzz is disconnected from actual NFL draft buzz. Because if you want to go back and look at all of the previous mock drafts this early in the process, year after year after year, mock drafts are always good content. As someone who works for a website, I can tell you that people click on mock drafts, so there'll always be a desire to do mock drafts. But even the people who write them this time of year kind of hate them because they know they're just going to be wrong. Because those mock drafts will reflect so-called media buzz more so than the actual process of the scouts, because the scouts haven't gotten that serious about it as of yet. It's just too early for them. They're trying to figure out who's going to make their 53-man roster, more so than, who's going to be their fourth-round pick next April. So the buzz that Newman's gotten right now is totally disconnected from his real, true NFL future. Maybe scouts will love him come January, February, March. Maybe they won't. But most of what happens this time of year when it comes to NFL draft buzz is just kind of a false positive, right? I mean, these mock drafts are notoriously wrong. I don't mean to bring up a bad subject, but think about how high Jake Fromm was listed in these mock drafts last year around this time. That's just kind of an example of how wrong these things can be. All right, let's do a couple more and then we've got to go. Little Wayne Carter says, DeJuan Mathis may win the starting job. The team says he's been that guy. You do see some evidence, whether it be Malik Herring, Eric Stokes. There's some Georgia players that really like Mathis. And I've said this before when it comes to other players. The players who are popular with other players, it does get my attention a little bit. It doesn't prove something emphatically, but it does get my attention. I've said that about Matt Landers before. It seems pretty obvious that Georgia players like him. Players only like players they think can play. So if the players still support Landers, then the chance of him having a good season is still at least a possibility. Players seem to support Mathis. At least a few of them have been pretty public about that. If players believe in Mathis, there's at least something to that. Andrew Hughes says, any chance someone switches positions to fill the quarterback room? Yes, I don't think the Georgia quarterback room is unfilled at the moment. You've got a veteran potential starter in Daniels. You've got a former four-star signee that flipped from Ohio State in Mathis. You've got an incoming freshman in Carson Beck who, has got a nice skill set, even if he's totally inexperienced and missed out on spring practice. You've got a guy in Stetson Bennett who was your primary backup a year ago. And you've got, to my count, 9,000 walk-ons, including a guy like, Austin Kirksey, who was, I think, the starter at Nevada, wasn't he? I think that Georgia still has enough quarterbacks. It's not a given that Georgia has a very good quarterback. We'll find that out once games begin. But in terms of the total number of bodies available in that room, it seems like Georgia probably has enough. Chase Barbie says, where is Stetson's respect? Yeah, all I can do, Chase, is be honest. Stetson was another player that was very popular with his teammates going back years ago. And I had a chance to speak to Stetson a little bit last spring. Some media members did. I think he has a lot of moxie with the way he speaks. It's easy to understand why people have had some confidence in Bennett, because he seemingly speaks in such a way that he's got confidence in himself. But I'm never going to come on this show and be anything other than honest with all of you. While I like Bennett and think he's a pretty intriguing prospect all the way around, I don't believe he's a candidate to be Georgia's starting quarterback. And that's not a slight on Bennett. It's just my honest opinion. So even if you don't agree, I hope you at least respect the fact that I respect you enough to want to be honest with how I feel about things. Don Williams says, time to start blocking trolls again. Yeah, we try to be very slow around here about who we block, but we encourage you to block whoever you need to make your experience more enjoyable. Marshall Fleming says he's hearing a lot of things, and yeah, who knows what's true? Who knows what's true? Pete Williams excited about Matt Landers for this year. Can't wait to see that. Hope that's true. Chase Barbie says that he's a little small. Yeah, if Stetson was a little bit taller, I think that he could definitely come across as a much different kind of player. But Bennett, like I said before, if you go back, you can probably find the video. He just kind of has a cool way of talking. He sounds like a quarterback, and you hate it that he's not just a little bit taller. You also wonder if he was playing in one of these offenses where, everybody's just sort of spread to the moon, and, in one of these leagues where there's open receivers all the time, how he could do in a situation like that, because he does kind of keep plays alive a little bit. It's just tough to do that kind of stuff in the SEC. Deion Ware says, apparently Deion was very pro Jamie Newman. He says, we went from a potential first-round pick to a bunch of bodies in the room. That's pretty funny. Look, I had tabbed Newman to be the starter. I fully believe he would have been the starter had he stayed. Who knows what happens once the season begins. But you can't necessarily say that Newman was obviously going to be better than JT Daniels. He very well might. On the basis of how he had been handled at Georgia, my assumption was he was destined to start. I was excited about seeing him at Georgia. I loved the way he looked in his uniform. But, in terms of NFL draft future, do you really think that JT Daniels, NFL draft profile is all that much lower than Jamie Newman's is? Maybe you do, but I don't know. I don't know. Let's do a couple more. We gotta go. I've said that now a million times. Mike Zambiazzi says, I'd love to see Pickens, Landers, and Bush out there at the same time. It'd be great for all those guys. You're kind of mentioning some of the bigger frame receivers Georgia has, and I understand that. But, I also believe that the untold story in Tua Tagovailoa having the success he had at Alabama was how good his receivers were that he threw to. I don't know that Tua is a historically good quarterback. He was a good quarterback, but I don't know that he was historically good. However, for me, the crop of receivers Alabama has had from the team last year, Waddle and Ruggs, who's gone, Judy, who's gone, Devontae Smith, who's still there, that may be the best four receivers I've ever seen on any one team at one time in the SEC, last year's LSU team included. So it'd be nice if the receivers that Georgia has could make the job of a quarterback a little easier. You'd love that to be true. I also think that quietly the Alabama offense has also benefited from its offensive coordinators as well. I talk a lot about Joe Brady, but Lane Kiffin obviously did good things for this team for 3 years, starting in 2014. Brian Dable came in 2018. He obviously did some good things. I think that Steve Sarkisian is doing some good things right now. Saban's been good at hiring offensive coordinators, which only puts the ball back in the court of Todd Monken, something I talked about a little earlier in the show. All right, we have really got to go. Bobby Bryan, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. A lot of good comments. I wish we could stay here all day long, but it is late and we have got to go. Thanks all for being here. Anything else on YouTube before we go? William Bird thinks that Kyle Trask could be the difference for Florida winning the game this season. That could be true, William. You may be right. If it's not true, though, as I've said before, it's time to stop talking about Dan Mullen as a quarterback whisperer. It's time to stop talking about Florida as any kind of real legitimate contender. If Georgia, through all the turmoil that it's had with its offense this year, if it produces a better offense, if it produces a better quarterback than what Florida has this season, then the Mullen narrative, I think, is over forever. It's one of the things that makes that game high stakes for this upcoming year. Mark Woodmansee also mentioned that Monken against Barry Odom's the first task. Yeah, Odom doesn't have much talent to work with, but I've told y'all a million times. I think that Sam Pittman made very good coordinator hires. Scott Harris, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Chili Vic, that's good to see you in the comment section today there as well. A lot of good commenters, a lot of good comments. Still pretty good numbers all the way around, but we've got to get ready to go. So sorry. We'll see you at 6 p.m. tonight on Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. We'll talk more about this. Also, check out the AJC online, ajc.com, for Atlanta News Now. Braves get the sweep in Fenway against the Boston Red Sox. You can follow that. You can obviously follow all the stuff that's still ongoing with the coronavirus. That's a big deal to pay close attention to. There is a lot to do all the way around to stay up to date with your Atlanta News Now. Make sure you do that. A couple other things to keep in mind here. Bigger numbers in terms of testing positive, University of Georgia. You've got to pay close attention to that. So we'll do it all online, Atlanta News Now at ajc.com. We'll look forward to seeing you then for that. Also R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Thanks to them for making all this possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all that for you. Air conditioning goes out, or you're worried it might go out, they can get your system tuned back up to factory fresh specs, but you've got to find them online. It's rsandrews.com. You'll have a great day. I'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Have a great day, everybody.